We're going to talk about how to optimize UX. We'll touch on other things like speed and security, overall web performance. So first of all, how to assess UX in general. Obviously, there's loads of different levels to this. Now, if you're a smaller company, just wanting to try and understand it a little bit more, or you're a bigger company, there's a couple of different ways you could look at it. One way might be just to look at doing a free trial of something like Hotjar as an example. You're probably aware of it, but if you did a trial, it'll give you the opportunity to assess your own site. And it'll cover a number of things that you can see here. Looking at what people are actually doing with heat maps and what they're going to click. You can record sessions, gather feedback, etc. So even at a basic level, you can do some learnings if you decide to do a free trial of something like Hotjar. If you wanted to go further, we would typically look at this framework to do an assessment of a client's UX. This framework consists of 4 core areas that you can see here, which run through usability, trust, emotion, and action. And they're not a step-by-step process necessarily. You're looking at all 4 and you continue on that cycle because you might add new areas to your website, or you might run a campaign with a landing page, for example. So it's always an opportunity to run through these 4 things and make sure they're being checked. The beauty of something like this, having a framework, is that it removes subjectivity and it keeps consistent approach to how we look at UX across our clients' websites. So if you're looking into each of these, usability as an example, this could vary wildly from, navigation being a bit too complex, or it's not working the way we'd expect it to. Could be really simple things like broken links or buttons that don't go to the right place or don't work ultimately. Could be other things like scrolls within a scroll within a page, things that you can identify quite quickly and think, yeah, that's clearly not good enough. We're stopping people doing what we want them to do. Trust, obviously, it's a bit more of an emotion or a feeling, but we all have a sense of trust as soon as we arrive on something like a website, and that could be down to the general design of it and the layout of it. But it could be other things that we're putting in place, whether that's some of the words that we use to kind of build trust. It could be based around some imagery or a step-by-step approach. And obviously things like reviews or Trustpilot, depending on your business, are going to add a little bit of trust to someone. So you're kind of assessing whether are we providing that level of trust for someone that doesn't really know us. Then you've got things like emotion, which are a little bit more difficult to gauge, but all of us have emotions, and different emotions that can range from being happy, or you might be having a laugh or a smile about something, depending on the type of business that you've got. At the same time, we can create negative emotions and create frustration. So you're trying to go through your site to say, what are we feeling as we go through this framework, and what emotions are we sending out, both to ourselves when we're testing it, but to potentially customers, and are we putting the barriers in place that we need to remove. And then you've got action. Every site has a reason for being and wants to achieve something. So you need to look at the action points, and are we making them easy for people to actually do what they need to do? Are we making it very clear what the action actually is? So in this example here, we've got ask us for a UX review in a consistent button. This is something you can ask if you want to drop in the messages. This is something that we could run through this framework with people like we do for clients, and run a UX review on your site. This is kind of a working example of how that might play out. So looking at the areas that we've just gone through, we'd make some initial notes on some of the key pages, this particular being the home page, and you're looking at the positives and negatives as like a commentary running throughout the site. And then you can take it back through those 4 areas within the framework. So let's take usability, which is in the yellow on the left-hand side, numbers 1, 4, and 5. you can see the first one's got a green tick. So we're basically saying in this current site, it's good that they've said add natural light to your home, because that gives me a clear picture of what this might actually achieve. And that might be the thing that I'm looking for, because we've got a dark area in the house. Then there's other things where usability has been given an X because we don't think it's delivering in that area. So you can go through each one and give positive and negative feedback to your own website, or as we do for client websites, and then see what needs to be improved, because you don't want everything to be negative. There's always something positive to take from an area. And then you've got things like trust. The fact that reviews are there is great, but then you've got to consider how many reviews should you or should you not have. You know, is just one review too few? And that doesn't really create trust. If you have more, fantastic, but can you have too many? So it's just questioning things like that to make sure that comes across clearly. And then from doing all of that, you could narrow down what are the kind of core areas to address. We're just picking out a few here, things like clarity of content and content hierarchy. You know, is that in the right order? You know, we can look here and think, am I going on a good journey here, or could that be delivered better, which we believe it could be. Setting expectations, you'll notice early on in this page, the green button says to basically book a survey, but you don't even know what the survey is at this point. So should that be somewhere else within the site, or you need to be educated first to say, what does a survey entail? You know, someone comes to my house, do I have to pay or not pay? Is it just a review and then they'll give me a recommendation? So it's making sure you set the expectations before someone engages with one of the action points. And then when you've looked at the kind of the key areas, you can then map them out to say, okay, as a team, where do we actually start? And so we've pulled out one here, which is like the prominence and clarity of a call to action. So that's been put in the top left corner, which is high impact and low effort. So we could go through that particular site we're showing and say, if we can make the call to actions more prominent and easier to follow, then that should create a high impact for that particular type of company. But it shouldn't take us too much time to actually do it either. So it's low effort. And then you've got the top right and the bottom left are the next two areas that you would focus on after you've delivered the top left corner. Bottom right, if there is anything that you might just decide to leave it because it's not worth putting time into it, and you can focus on the other three corners. So that's kind of a background to a UX review that we would do for clients. It can be, you know, quite in depth because we're just showing you one page there. You know, you'd be doing that for every page on your site and going through that same framework. Other things that we do, and we offer this for free, which you can also request, but is just a general web review. So we try and speak to people to say, what are your pain points and what are your goals for the website? So we can capture them first of all before we do the web review. And it also helps avoid any subjectivity. We can kind of say, right, well, we know there's certain things that we need to consider. So these are some of the things that we would look at to say design and brand application. Could it look and feel better? So this might be just consistency in design, you know, general layout and structure of the design. Could be color inconsistency. So you might have a color green, but for some reason it's different in different areas. The overall application of it, layout of type, etc. You know, can that be better? We could give a review on some of that. Messaging and positioning. You know, are we saying the right things? Are we actually delivering the content with clarity? Are we positioning ourselves well? If you have an SEO expert or you engage with an SEO company, great. But there's some basic technical SEO that you could be doing, which would help the site. Loading speed, you can test that on a number of things, GTmetrix, and some other areas that we'll show in a bit. Security, you know, is the site airtight? And have you considered that as much as you could do? So a number of different areas that you could look at across this. We'll kind of show you each of those, but they're like the areas in a web review that we would start to cover and consider. So at least, again, a little bit like the UX review, there is a structure that we can go through to make sure that we're capturing all that we need to. And then you've got design and brand application. So is it consistent across all channels? And this is, I think, something that a lot of companies struggle with. The major brands globally will be better at it. Lego as an example has a really strong identity, a strong color palette, has different audiences, from like investors on one area or to children on another site, through to environments and packaging and so forth. But it's making sure that all those parts are consistent, because if all other activities driving to the website, we need to make sure the website is consistent and matches all of that as well. So this is the opportunity to look at the design and application of your site. And then other things like the words that we use. So we talked about emotion before. Any word can give off a different type of emotion. But you've also got kind of from a brand perspective, how do you want to be perceived? So hello and welcome say the same thing, but they're very different in their approach. Hello feels a bit more friendly, welcome's a little bit more formal. So it's considering every single word that you use within the site and what you think that says to someone. Equally, on the bottom corner, we've got cordially invite someone or warmly invite someone. Essentially, it means the same thing, but the Hermes brand uses cordially to invite people to see if they want to apply for a job, because it's trying to position it to a certain type of person that they want to work for the organization. Warmly might feel better for something like a charity, for example, but it's just making sure you consider what you're saying to people. And then security, there's obvious things like looking for the padlock in the top corner to make sure that the site is secure. And you can obviously click that and look into further detail. There's other measures you can take for security throughout the site and looking after forms and so forth, or working with an agency to maintain your site and make sure that all the things that need to be done are being done. Obviously, the hosting provider and the server it sits on can be an important factor in how secure your site is as well. And then things like accessibility. This is just one example of a site that you can go to test your own website. We will send an email after this with a recording of this and some useful links, so you can explore that further. But then other basic things for accessibility, going through and making sure that you've applied alt tags, whether that's to imagery, just best practice, full stop. And then things like color contrast, for me, that's always existed before the internet as well. You'd want some color contrast in printed collateral, but the difference between print and screen is screen has so many more variables, in the fact that I could have been on a different monitor, a different quality of monitor. I could have the brightness up or down. So you've got to consider the color contrast more in this space and make sure that that's helping people to be able to action something. You see some instances where you have a rollover state on a button, but the rollover state pretty much hides the text. So we're not making it easy for people to understand what the button's trying to do and what action they need to take. Other things like being consistent with H1, H2 tags. Just in general, again, good practice from a design and kind of typographic layout perspective. But for things like screen readers, it gives the opportunity to understand what the page is about. So if it was something about football and that was in the title, great. And then you might break that down into defense, midfield, attack, goals. So the H2 tags are clear and you know what the content is about. Again, it's about the hierarchy and content and structure of your clarity of content and structure. So kind of touched on that, just making sure you're saying the right things at the right time as you run through a page, and having complete clarity in what you want people to do. And also the overall design layout as well. There's sites where you see text spread from left to right across the whole of the page, just making it hard for people to read. So considerations around the width of a column of text and the clarity of what you're actually saying is really important. And then the text size as well. One, making sure it's consistent, but making sure that it's readable on all different devices. And again, you sometimes see on a mobile text being so small that you're struggling to read it, which is obviously no good for anyone. Other things like URL structure. So everyone will see these every single day. But this is it broken down into the slices that essentially create a typical URL. And then you can look at things like good and bad practice, really. So this is an obvious one, but just naming the folder structure well in the first place is obviously better for you to organize yourself, but also from a website perspective and a user perspective, it's better. And from a SEO perspective, it's better, obviously, using blog rather than folder one. other things like the URL, the slogan within the URL needs to be descriptive enough to understand what the page is about, but short enough to get it quite quickly. And there's two examples there. This is a UX review, great. And then we could make it really long-winded where a lot of those words don't add any value. So it's making sure it's descriptive enough, but short enough at the same time. And then looking at other things like best practice using a hyphen between words, lowercase throughout is generally deemed to be better. And again, just creates consistency for yourself when you're creating the overall structure. And then other things like website speed, we just touched on that earlier, can be an important part of any website. You can obviously use page speed insights as Google Lighthouse, but we kind of feel this one offers a little bit more. Now you can push for 100% if you want to, which is great, but it's not the be all and end all. It's just nice to know where your score is and see where you can improve, especially if your scores are particularly low. But obviously having a good server or a dedicated server would change the speed of your site anyway. But this is just another way of saying, are we doing the best we possibly can for our website and our customers? And then finally, great UX things to remember. So a little while ago, we had a podcast with Kyle, who's head of UX at Barclays. And you can scan the QR code there if you want to listen to it. But these are a few little takeaways that we've put into this for you.
If you want somebody to do something, you make it as easy as possible for them to do that thing, right? I think especially today, to attract somebody to a website, if they're coming via a PPC ad, you're paying money for them to be there. And if it is that you want them to convert, so sign up to, say, an email subscription or buy something from a store, you need to make that interaction as simple as possible to make sure that you are getting value in return for what you're paying to get someone there in the first place. Now, that's a very e-commerce marketing driven example, but every website out there is aimed to do something. So you just have to make it as easy as possible for users to do that thing when you arrive there.
Okay, so if you want to listen to the whole thing, you can scan the QR code. There's a link to that directly. We'll obviously follow up in the email as well with a link to this particular podcast, but it's a decent listen, about 35 minutes compared to the 18 minutes that we're on now. And then finally, there's two parts of this. The UX obviously is an in-depth approach that we work with clients on, which is kind of paid pieces of work. But because you've attended today, we're going to offer a free web review. So you can either drop that in the notes now if that's something you're interested in, or you can follow us afterwards. So feel free to do that. I'm looking at the time. We're on 18 minutes 17 seconds, so I'm true to my word. Kept 18 minutes of your time. So yeah, basically just like to thank you for spending some time with us this morning. Hopefully those 18 minutes have been useful. And as I say, we'll follow up with an email with the recording of this, link to the podcast, and then some other useful links as well that we've talked about today. So yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.